Mr. Roderick Hawkins, who is the Senior Advisor for Neighborhood Development and Community Engagement at the Office of the Mayor, to come up and kick us off for what I hope will be a really provocative morning.
They really meant I'm at the beginning of the program, so no. Good morning, everyone. Let me first start by saying good morning. Hope you all are well, and thank you, Consuela, for the introduction, and thank you, Jerry, for the invitation, the gracious invitation. And I've been at the mayor's office about 3 months. Before I was at the mayor's office, I actually spent 8.5 years at the Chicago Urban League, where we worked, of course, in the community, and now in my role as a senior advisor, I lead the Office of Public Engagement, and also working with the Deputy Mayor, Andrea Zoppo, on neighborhood development. But one of the things that's important to our work is stronger communities, stronger neighborhoods, and one important part of that, of course, addressing and ending homelessness. And I definitely have a passion for it when it comes to youth homelessness in particular. Thanks to friends like Tracy, Baim, who's here, and Kim Hunt, who's getting her coffee now, and their work with the Pride Action Tank and confronting and ending LGBTQ youth homelessness. But in particular, I want to just thank each and every one of you for being here today and for committing yourselves to this bold campaign. I believe it was Burnham that everyone likes to quote the whole phrase, the quote, "Make no little plans." So I know today you're not making any little plans, you're making big plans, you're making a tall plan to end youth homelessness by 2020. So I applaud you for the work that you're doing and the work that you're going to do today. I know it won't be easy. I know there'll be probably some moments of stress and frustration, but it's important that you're here and you're part of the conversation. And I hope that this leads to, I know this will lead to better coordination, better communication, and of course action that ends youth homelessness. It is, and also breaking down of silos. I know that's something, as a new person to city government, I know that can be a challenge when it comes to city government, but I know that also could be an issue in the not-for-profit sector and those who serve some of our most vulnerable citizens. But I know you are the people in this room that will do it and can address it head on. And I applaud you for your efforts. And of course, on behalf of Mayor Emanuel and the administration, we thank you for being a part of the community, and for being here today, and for saying that you're in this campaign for our youth. You're in this campaign to end homelessness. You're in this campaign to work together and to coordinate together to address this and to confront it and to end it. I know it won't be easy, but I know you are the people who can do it. So again, thank you, and I wish you well today. And I know it's going to be a productive conversation.
Belong to someone.
Oh, that's mine. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Okay, who's excited here?
Yeah.
Let's get excited. Come on. We're going to end youth homelessness.
Yes.
We know that we can end youth homelessness because we are already ending homelessness in Chicago. And I have to tell you, we've learned so many lessons from our work in ending veterans' homelessness. The number one lesson that we've learned is that we absolutely have to work together. None of this happens without working together. We know that we need one list of every single homeless youth in this city. We know that we need great data because it's that data that's going to drive our work. We need a roadmap, a path forward about where we're going to go, and we have to be flexible. If there's one important lesson we've learned with our Veterans Initiative, is we have to be flexible. We are moving in the right direction in Chicago. This year, our point-in-time count has indicated that we have reduced homelessness by 13%. We've reduced veterans' homelessness by 22%. And we're able to achieve that because of the incredible work we've been doing with initiatives. And we are going to do that with youth homelessness in Chicago. The Chicago Task Force on Youth has been working so hard on this issue for a number of years. Could they please stand up, because we need to give them an incredible round of applause. The Chicago Task Force They have positioned the City of Chicago to be successful with a new demonstration project opportunity that is in front of us thanks to HUD. Because of their incredible work, we are on a path forward where we know we can end youth homelessness by 2020 in Chicago. In order to be competitive with this new opportunity of the demonstration project, we have to establish several different things, one of which is a youth advisory board. Could I please have the members of the youth advisory board stand up? To guide this work moving forward. We cannot make decisions without them, and we will make great decisions because they are with us. Even if HUD does not select Chicago as a youth demonstration project community, the work that we're doing here today and the work that we're doing on this initiative is going to position us to move the needle on youth homelessness. We're laying the groundwork. Regardless of whether we become a demonstration project, we will have the roadmap forward to be able to do this work. But again, we need everybody at the table. We need government. We need nonprofits. We need youth who have the experience of homelessness. We need community stakeholders. We need community members. We need corporations. We need everybody at the table. There are a few people that I want to take a moment to thank because they've been very instrumental in pulling this meeting together today under a very short timeline. Jerry Linus, Flora Koppel, I know Flora's here because I saw her, there's Flora, David Sinsky, and Paul Hammond. They are four of our great leaders in this work in Chicago. I also want to make sure to thank the All Chicago team who worked so hard to move the needle on homelessness in Chicago. Thank you, All Chicago team. We can only do this if we do it together. Now, who's in to end youth homelessness by 2020? Please welcome Eric Maston of the National Network on Youth. Eric? Oh, there you are. Hi, Eric. Thank you.
There we go. Okay, I didn't break it. Good. Thank you, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. As Noni noted, I represent the National Network for Youth. I'm our Director of Public Policy. The National Network for Youth is a 40-plus-year-old national organization made up of advocates, members, especially providers that serve runaway and homeless youth. We are the voice in DC of more than 300 national providers around the nation that work to prevent and end youth and young adult homelessness in their communities, including wonderful members right here in Chicago. I'm excited to be here today and wanted to take a moment to give you a bit of information about the national perspective. Why is now the time to address and end youth and young adult homelessness? And what are we doing to make that happen nationally to support the great work that you're doing here in Chicago? So, as I said, the network has been around for over 40 years. Back when Congress passed the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, which provided the first programs to directly and specifically focus on youth experiencing homelessness. And over the years, that program has been expanded, it's been reauthorized, and we now have a range of options available to serve youth that communities can utilize and receive federal funding for. Those include our basic center programs that provide emergency shelter. Those include our transitional living programs, which provide longer-term supports to really help youth and young adults transition successfully into adulthood. Now, one of the things that we've been doing as the network is working with youth, including our National Youth Advisory Council, which we've just convened here back in Labor Day, right here in Chicago, and bringing the youth perspective and voice, drawing on our members, providers, to really identify what works. Just this past March, we released our updated proposed system to end youth and young adult homelessness, bringing together what we know from providers, from youth, to really understand the services and the policies that will have an instrumental impact. And when I say end youth and young adult homelessness, what we mean is not that there will never be youth who are homeless or who experience homelessness, but that when they do, it will be rare, it will be brief, and it will be non-recurring. And we know that the federal government has supported this effort as well. Why is this the time? First, the federal government has made a continued commitment to addressing homelessness at all levels. We heard comment about the efforts and successes that we've seen in addressing veterans' homelessness. And with the update of the Opening Doors strategic plan to prevent and address homelessness back in 2015, the federal government made a commitment to end youth homelessness nationally by 2020. And we've seen that commitment play out from federal agencies. We convene them annually through a federal agency roundtable, and we see them making those commitments and working day in and day out to reduce those barriers, to ensure that youth have the services and supports that they need, because we know that youth don't exist in just one system. They interact and interface with different systems: the juvenile justice system, the mental health system, the education system. So we're working together and bringing the federal government together to make sure that that commitment is there. And Congress has backed up that investment. They've increased funding for Runaway and Homeless Youth Act programs by 5% in the last full congressional appropriation to a record $119 million. They have increased both the authorization and funding for the Education for Homeless Children and Youth Act, which provides support for youth experiencing homelessness and their families through schools. And we've seen unique strategies like the Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project grants for HUD. And we're really excited that in the current working drafts to fund the government for the current fiscal year, because it's still waiting, as happens in DC, that those Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project grants will be continued yet again. We had $33 million in the last fiscal year. We're looking at another $40 million. And most significantly, communities are coming together and recognizing that now is the time. This increased community awareness, saying we see it, we see the problem, we see the challenges, whether it's funding and investments or whether it's bringing communities together to break down silos and barriers. So I talked a little bit earlier about what does that look like. Well, we know what works. We know that systems that collaborate and work together to address youth and young adult homelessness provide them with supports, whether it's making sure that a youth who is in the child welfare or foster care system successfully exits that system and does not become homeless when they leave. Or we know that juvenile justice systems and law enforcement need to come together to understand the unique challenges that youth face so that they don't enter the juvenile justice system just because they're experiencing homelessness. And we know that there are existing programs and supports out there, like Runaway and Homeless Youth providers, who make and deliver services for youth so that they can successfully not become homeless, transition out of homelessness into being housed, and to make sure that they don't end up re-entering, but know that they're available and build that relationship with youth so that if they do experience homelessness again, they understand how to navigate the systems, and they know that there will be adults who care for them and will help them navigate it. So what does this mean here? I mentioned the federal agency investment and the providers coming together at the national level. we're seeing that here. Whether it's communities coming together to invest in 100-day challenges through the Away Home America initiative, to identify ways to put a focus for 100 days on addressing the challenge in the community, or whether it's bringing together, like you are here today, to address youth homelessness by investing a community in this challenge. Providers are taking the first step already here in Chicago by utilizing the proposed system to end youth and young adult homelessness to map out how a coordinated community response will work and can work in Chicago, identifying your strengths, identifying areas that maybe are gaps and need additional investment. And by utilizing this environmental scan and this analysis, you're building a record and a successful strategy to fully apply and hopefully win an award for HUD's Youth Homelessness Demonstration Project. And as was noted, whether you're successful or not, this will help to demonstrate Chicago's commitment, and it will help to create a community where you're able to take advantage of the opportunities that are coming out from the federal government. That increased investment for Runaway and Homeless Youth Act providers, being able to identify silos at the federal level that are also potentially silos at the state and local level, that you can understand strategies to navigate and to make sure that youth do not become homeless, or that when they do, it is rare, brief, and non-recurring. And I commit to you, on behalf of the network, that we will continue to be your advocates in DC, to provide you with support, the knowledge and understanding of what's happening at the national level, and to help foster and support initiatives like the I Am In campaign to make sure that communities are able to come together to really tackle this challenge in a meaningful way. I'm really excited and honored to be here, and I am really excited and look forward to hearing all of the great things that will be coming out of Chicago in the coming weeks and months and years ahead to tackle this issue in a transformative way. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Someone's going to advance the slides when I give them.
Yeah, over here.
All right, we're good? Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. I'm the Executive Director at Chapin Hall. My name is Bryan Samuels. I'm here to talk some about the Voices of Youth Count, which is an initiative to end homelessness. It's a national initiative, and I want to talk some about that, as well as what some of the local implications are. First slide. So there are lots of ways in which young people become homeless. There are many pathways to becoming homeless. And so the Voices of Youth Count is really intended to be a national initiative to systematically go through and document the ways in which young people become homeless, as well as to design strategies to address the current circumstance they're in, with the ultimate goal of ending homelessness. And so I come at this work from a couple of different perspectives. I was the child welfare director here in Illinois for 4 years. And the day I took over the agency, there were 400 young people who had run away from foster care and we hadn't seen in at least a month. And so understanding the challenges that those young people face is something that I bring forward with me. At the same time, after leaving DCFS, I spent 2.5 years at the Chicago Public Schools as the chief of staff, and one of the responsibilities I had was to really provide oversight and support to the McKinney-Vento program to make sure that the district was fulfilling its obligation to provide the appropriate supports to young people who found themselves homeless. And then, next slide. And then I left there and I went to the federal government. So I spent 4.5 years in the Obama administration. And one of the areas that I was responsible for was the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act and making sure that it was appropriately implemented. And I was part of the team that developed the Opening Doors plan as well as the amendment to the Opening Doors plan. But admittedly, when we developed that first plan, we had a plan to end homelessness for adults of 5 years, and the plan for ending homelessness for youth was for 10 years. And the reason why we added another 5 years to that objective is that we didn't have the data or information to establish reasonable benchmarks and to understand what resources would be required in order for us to effectively address this issue. The federal government had no formal estimate of the number of runaway and homeless youth in the country, and therefore we had no way of understanding whether the resources we had would adequately address this population or whether we need to go further in order to respond appropriately and ultimately to have a positive impact. And so at the federal level, we devised a data strategy that would give us the information that we needed on an ongoing basis to better understand the population, to respond appropriately, and to put communities in a position to demonstrate and document whether they were making progress towards ending homelessness. And so this is just a slide that summarizes all of the tricky data activities that we wanted to engage in order for the federal government to provide some leadership in this area. I left DC in 2013, and when I left there, we still hadn't implemented this plan because we didn't have the resources to implement it. And so our challenge was really trying to figure out how we move this work ahead in the absence of data, and we moved ahead fairly slowly. So next slide. So quick story. So when I left the Obama administration and came back to Chicago, I was still convinced that we needed that data, that groups like this needed to be able to talk about young people in very concrete ways and accurately define the challenges that they face in order to get to ending homelessness. So I came back to Chicago and started knocking on doors. And by the time we got to the end of knocking on doors, we had raised $4.5 million in order to do a national estimate to develop and understand the phenomenon of youth homelessness. But again, our goal wasn't to do a better count. Our goal is to end homelessness. And so as you understand Voices of Youth Count, it's not a point-in-time count, right? We engaged in a point-in-time count as one component of a larger effort. But if you're going to end homelessness in Chicago, you're not going to do it based on the data that you get from a point-in-time count alone. Next slide. So the Voices of Youth Count is a multi-dimensional, multi-pronged strategy to provide communities like Chicago with the best data possible. One of the components is a point-in-time count, and we worked with Chicago this summer to do a point-in-time count in a different way. Many of the folks in the room may have participated in that. So we did a point-in-time count in Chicago and larger Cook County on Thursday, August the 4th, and Friday, August the 5th. We had 27 teams out doing counting. Each of these teams were led by youth who had experienced homelessness or were currently experiencing homelessness, ages 18 to 25. So they actually led the teams. We had 20 organizations that were a part of that. And in those activities alone, we were able to complete over 600 surveys of runaway and homeless youth. So we have a ton of data about young people who are homeless here in Chicago, and we'll be working with the planning committee to really make meaning of that data and ultimately use it in a constructive way. But that's not the end of the Voices of Youth Count. So as you can see here, we're also doing in-depth interviews to better understand the ways in which young people became homeless. Chicago was a test site for all of those activities, and we also have completed 45 or 50 in-depth surveys with young people who are homeless here in Chicago. We also picked 4 other jurisdictions around the country to do that. And so we'll not only be able to take that survey data and compare what youth in Chicago look like versus youth in Boston versus youth in Texas. Austin, Texas versus youth in Walla Walla. But we'll also be able to look at the trajectories, the public systems that they went through before they became homeless. And we'll be able to make those comparisons both amongst youth here in Chicago, but also across the country. In addition to that, we're systematically accessing HMIS data and other child welfare and available data, as well as McKinney-Vento data to overlay that here in Chicago so people can see the data that we get from a point-in-time count, the data that we got from the surveys, as well as data that we can get from public agencies that are also serving these young people. We'll also do a policy and fiscal analysis, and lastly, a provider survey. So we'll be able to look at what young people say they need versus what's available locally, and so all of that data will be coming forth over the next couple of months here in Chicago, but it'll also be available in the other 21 communities around the country. Next slide. And so this is the map that shows the 22 communities around the country that have participated in the Voices of Youth count. The target population really is that 13 to 25 age group. We really are looking at the definition of homelessness that would be used in the Runaway and Homeless Youth Act, as well as the definition that would be used by HUD. Two really important things that I would point out to close in terms of progress. I mentioned that we raised $4.5 million. The first $2.5 million we raised through our own funds, as well as the philanthropic community, and we're very pleased that we were able to do that. But it's worth noting that HUD got so excited about the work that we're doing and believed that we were doing it in a rigorous way that when Congress gave HUD $2 million to do an estimate of the number of runaway and homeless youth, HUD decided rather than to go out on their own and sometimes duplicate or replicate activities that we were engaged in, they agreed to partner with us. So they took their $2 million, we took our $2.5 million, and together we're doing this work together. So when you see this, the products that come out of this, know that this is not just informing your local effort, but it is also informing HUD's understanding of this population and what it might do differently. One other concrete result of this work is that now HUD is going to recalibrate its youth numbers in the January count. So it's not going to hold communities accountable for their old numbers, but it's going to give communities the opportunity to update their youth numbers and have that be a starting point for benchmarking going forward. And lastly, we recently released a toolkit that we use to do the point-in-time count in these 22 communities. And based on that experience, we now have a toolkit that will be available to all COCs across the country, and HUD will point to that toolkit as an effective strategy for enhancing and making more robust the activities around point-in-time counts here in Chicago, but also going forward. So we've already had some concrete impact on the way the system understands this work, and we expect through the data that we'll be able to provide here in Chicago, that Chicago will be well situated to use that data and to build on the assets that are already here in Chicago to develop not a better strategy for counting kids, but a better strategy for ending homelessness. So thank you and enjoy the rest of the day.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. I think we, on the planning committee, can all go. I want to take a moment just to acknowledge the staff of All Chicago who pulled off this incredible feat in a very, very short period of time. We would not be here without them, so thank you. So Roderick stole my thunder when he said, quoting Daniel, make no small plans. That's not how we do it. We got some big plans for you all in this room today. And so you've heard that a lot of people talking about it's time. And that's true. But it's also because Chicago is ready. And we're ready because currently we have a lot of things going on. And I just want to share with you how amazing this city is and how amazing this homeless youth sector is and what is already in place that makes us an amazing candidate for this grant. So let's get started. Right now, in terms of coordinated policy and advocacy agenda, we are addressing the 4 domains that has been identified by usage. They are safe and stable housing, education and employment, physical, mental, and behavioral health, and permanent connections. The work that our sector does aligns with those goals. From what is, we have a very culturally competent and diverse model of services geographically located across the city. They include street and community outreach, drop-in centers, low-threshold overnight shelter beds, interim housing beds, transitional living program beds, permanent supportive housing beds, diversity service models that include the geographic diversity of our city, the racial and ethnic diversity of our city. It is inclusive of the LGBTQ population. It is inclusive of trafficked youth. And we are in the process of expanding mental health services for homeless youth with the support of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless and area FQHCs. We've started the coordination. Since 2011, Chicago's Task Force on Homeless Youth has successfully prioritized advocacy and policy within key stakeholder groups and systems. We are priority goal number 3 in Chicago's Plan to End Homelessness 2.0. So if you didn't know that, check it out. We have been achieving amazing success through the efforts of our task force members with the Chicago Public Schools and the STLS programs. We have engaged with DCFS with a cross-training for the DCFS and the homeless youth sector providers. We are now working through the guidance of the Chicago Coalition for Homeless with city colleges. We have infiltrated the employment task force of the Chicago Continuum. We're looking out for those WIOA dollars. We have proposed the expansion of mental health needs in a very strategic way with the Department of Public Health. And we're hoping to achieve some mobile units for all the young people who need those services across the city. We have designed and implemented the first Chicago survey of precariously housed youth. In 2013, the city was able to, with the guidance of young people and our youth provider sector, do an account or survey that was specific to youth. We have hosted, thanks to Tracy, Baim, an amazing LGBTQ summit. We have selected, we were, as a city, as Bryan said, selected as one of those communities for the Voices of Youth count. And thanks to the efforts, again, of our task force members, there have been negotiations with CHA around some vouchers. We're still working on that. We're not giving up. But we got a ways to go. So in 2016, the Homeless Youth Task Force in the City of Chicago has recommended to the Continuum of Care that Chicago apply for the HUD Homeless Youth Demonstration Project in order to expand upon the achievements of the Homeless Youth Task Force, but to also identify further gaps in the service models. We want to identify, we want to design, we want to implement models of services that bridge those gaps with strategies that address primary prevention intervention strategies, family re-engagement and resiliency and reunification, foster care transition, juvenile justice engagement, host homes, rapid rehousing that is youth-focused, and coordinated access that is youth-focused. So together, as a comprehensive, coordinated community response, we can absolutely set youth up for long-term success, to avoid chronic homelessness, and instead become thriving adults and members of Chicago. Are you in?